Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us again. My name is Frank Vodavnik. I'm one of the Associate Directors at the Center for Technical Assistance for Excellence in Special Education at Utah State University. And I'm here with Brinley Jones and Steve Smith to help support the OSEEL staff in helping you learn some information about several of the annual performance report indicators on preschool transition, post-secondary transition, and post-school outcome survey. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Alicia for her to review the agenda with you and then introduce the OSEEL staff that are here today.
Hey, welcome everybody to what is our last OSEEL Guides workshop of this school year. So this will be the last one of this school year. We'll have some conversations about what comes next, and have some communications come out to you probably throughout the summer about what comes next for you all for OSEEL Guides workshops. Today, Frank's going to share a leadership takeaway and we're going to start off that way to help prepare you for the rest of the conversations we're going to have. We're going to be talking about indicator 12 and part C to be transition. And Andrea Bartholomew, our school readiness branch manager, is going to lead us through that conversation. We're going to talk about secondary transition and indicator 13. And Carolyn Morrison, the director of the Division of IDA Monitoring and Results, is going to lead that conversation. And then we're going to talk about post-school outcomes. And we have Dr. Jason Wheatley, the program administrator for the Transition Education Unit, and Dr. Allison Johnson, the assistant program administrator for the Transition Education Unit, who will be discussing those. And we're also joined today by Dr. Thomas Williams, who is the director of the Early Learning Unit within OSEEL. Okay, next slide, Brinley. All right, so I'm so happy to see that so many of you already have your cameras on. Thank you for that. We do want you to attend and participate. I hope you were able to access the notes pages that we sent. Several of you had asked for those, and we were happy to be able to finally be able to provide those for you for this session. Be sure to unmute or ask questions in the chat. And if we can't answer your question today, we'll be sure to follow up. But this is your training, and we want you to be able to ask the questions that you need to ask during that. And then be able at the end of this to share your immediate next step at the end of the workshop. Be able to think about what can you put on your calendar for that next thing you can do to help carry forward what you've learned in today's workshop. Okay, Frank, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, thanks, Alicia. So as Alicia said, we normally do the leadership takeaway at the very end of the workshop, but we wanted to kind of flip that around a little bit today. And I wanted to talk to you about this issue of collaboration. And the reason we wanted to put it forward is today we're going to be talking about a lot of different aspects of the system of special education, spanning from early childhood all the way through post-school. And we wanted to get you in the mindset of thinking about your systems and how you interact with those systems, the various systems that are involved with kids throughout their time in school, even before they come to school. So one of the most effective strategies that you can use is to really build your skills at being able to collaborate, to work collaboratively with parents, with other agencies, with the other parts of the school system, with general education, with Title I, with the support staff, with everyone. And that ability to collaborate effectively will reduce your stress level immensely and will help facilitate a system that will lead to much more effective outcomes for kids with disabilities. When we look at teaching strategies, collaboration is one of the high leverage practices that the Council for Exceptional Children and the Cedar Center at Florida State University have published. It's one of the most effective strategies. So learning to effectively collaborate with everyone is one of those things that we really want you to think about. But as you're listening to the different parts of this, transitions for kids throughout the school day, throughout the school years, think about how you, when you're talking about preschool, transition from Part C programs to preschool district programs. Think about how you collaborate with the Part C providers and the other agencies that are involved with kids, and think about, again, as children work through the school system from year to year, from level to level, and think about those transitions and how you can help support those to be more effective and better for kids. You can't do everything. There is so much going on in special education, and you have so many responsibilities as a special education director that you just can't do everything. And so you have to rely on your ability to have those relationships with others so that the work can get done. So that's our takeaway for today. Focus on learning, working on strategies to effectively collaborate with others, with other parts of the system, with families, with other agencies, and it will just make your life so much easier. Okay. Any thoughts or questions about that today? All right. And I'm going to turn it over to, I believe Steve's going to kick us off with the discussion of the federal requirements for Indicator 12.
Thank you, Frank. Good afternoon, everyone. It's still morning for me, but good afternoon. I'm glad to see you all on here again today. I'm going to just really quickly hit the high-level overview of what what OSEP is asking of the state to submit, and really, tying it into what Frank was just talking about, Indicator 12, early childhood transition. This is really your first opportunity to have interaction with families and their children. For the most part, unless you have families that have older children, this is really the first opportunity you have to collaborate with them and to really get things started from your district perspective, on the right foot with families and parents. And so that's really why this is important. But what OSEP is looking for is, do you meet certain timelines, and have you done things in a timely manner? And that's really important too, because you're looking at, getting as early a start as possible on helping these children to acclimate to a new environment, a new setting, and really get the services they need to be successful later, as we talk about indicators 13 and 14. So what this is looking for is the percentage of the children referred to by Part C prior to age 3. So you might get a referral that is not within a certain timeline, and that's not your fault. But what this is looking at is when the Part C program refers those children to you, the percentage who were found eligible and have an IEP developed and implemented by their 3rd birthday. So really the day that child turns 3 is what's being looked at here. And there's 6 components to this indicator. So it's a lot of moving parts, but really we're looking at the number of children served in Part C and referred, right? So that A is the whole universe of children you're looking at, is who was in Part C and then they were referred to Part B. And then of those who were referred, that were determined not eligible prior to the 3rd birthday. C is those who were found eligible and have an IEP developed and implemented by their 3rd birthday. And then D, there might be parent refusal. So the parent might say, I don't grant, permission to evaluate my child. And so that's D. And then E is the number of children determined to be eligible for early intervention services less than 90 days before their 3rd birthday. So really this whole indicator is looking at, like, if you have 90 days before the 3rd birthday, you really need to be able to get this process done and have an IEP in place if the child's eligible. But there may be some who are referred after that 90-day window. And then F, the number of children whose parents chose to continue early intervention services beyond the child's 3rd birthday through a state's policy. And I apologize, Alicia, I forgot to check on Kentucky and how that works, but I'm sure Andrea will probably cover that. So that's really what we're looking at, is all those children who are referred before their third birthday, and whether or not you all are meeting the timeline for getting them evaluated and having an IEP implemented. Next slide. So the target must be 100%, right? Like it might not happen 100% of the time, but that's the goal. That's what the expectation is from OSEP to KDE. That's what KDE's expectation is of each of you in your districts. Category F is to be used only by states and territories that have an approved policy for that continuation of Part C services beyond the third birthday. And then information must be provided about the timely correction of noncompliance. So if your indicator data show that you're less than 100%, that would be a finding of noncompliance. And then you would have to make some corrections, and that information is also provided to OSEP in the following year's report. Next slide. So now I am going to turn it over to Andrea, and she's going to talk to you about how this actually works and looks in Kentucky.
All right. Thanks, Steve. Good morning to Chase. Good afternoon to Kentucky. Hope everyone's doing well. I see a lot of familiar faces through here. I'm excited to be here with you guys today. I've set myself a timer because, as a lot of those familiar faces can tell you, I could talk about preschool for days and days. So I'm going to set my timer so I can keep us on track today. We're going to talk a little bit about Part C to Part B transition and how that looks in the state-funded preschool program. To answer the question real quick, Kentucky does not have a policy or plan that provides early intervention services past the age of 3. So all of our students will transition at their third birthday. So that F on the measurement table does not apply to Kentucky. Next slide, please. So this is a quote that I really enjoy from out Tace's way in Colorado. There's 1,825 days between a child is born and when they go to kindergarten. That's not that many days when you think about the grand scheme of things. It's already almost May 1st. How fast has this school year gone for everyone? So that is a very few amount of days that we have to really impact the lives and the outcomes of our youngest and oftentimes our most vulnerable kids in our state. We know that our early childhood population is sometimes they struggle the most with COVID impacts. We had a lot of kiddos that didn't have any experiences that we would have wanted them to have had. They're coming to us delayed, behind, and a lot of different skills. And so we know that our little ones are where we need to spend a lot of our time soaking up that information, providing it to them for that 1,825 days before they go to kindergarten. Next slide, please. All right, so this transition process, it should be as seamless as possible. It doesn't always happen that way. We know that. Those of us who've spent time in districts, those of us who've done this process know that sometimes there are bumps in the road, there are issues that we have, but we really want to make it as seamless as possible because this is not just the child transitioning. This is the family transitioning as well. Very oftentimes, you are the very first person from that school district, from your school district, which you represent, to make contact with this family that you're going to have in your district for the next, 14 years, depending on their age, 15 years, depending on how they are. So that's something that's really important. You're going to give them that first glimpse of how your district can support them, can collaborate with them, can offer them what they need to help their child be successful, because this is the most important person in their life. This is the most special thing they have, and they are giving it to you to provide them special education services. That's a big deal. I know if you're a parent or if you have a grandparent or you've had experiences with transitioning children, it can be hard when you're on the other side of that table. I used to tell my parents all the time when I was teaching, oh, it's fine. They're going to be great. No big deal. And then I had kids and I cried my eyes out when I left them in preschool. So I understand from the different side of the table on that one. Next slide, please. So your responsibilities as a school district. You should attend the transition meetings. First steps or KEIS, Kentucky Early Intervention Systems. New name, trying to get used to it. It's been First Steps for a very long time. That's still in my vernacular. So the KEYS program should contact you in advance, well in advance, to schedule those transition meetings. Again, we know this doesn't always happen. Variety of reasons why, but we know that it doesn't always go as smoothly. But you should try for every transition meeting that you have, you really should try your best to get there or send a district representative. You know, it could be a teacher, it could be a special education facilitator, it could be a principal of a school if they have some training. It could be even, you know, you as director of special education would be great to go to these meetings, or your preschool coordinator if you're not one and the same. Having those interactions with parents and with the KEYS program providers is really important to keep those things going smoothly for transition. Now, when you're at the transition meeting, they'll be provided options to parents. So there's a Head Start program in your communities, your preschool program. They may even be offered some private, thinking about private placements as far as private schools or childcare, things that parents may want to make different choices for their student. But if they choose to complete a referral for your local school district, you need to schedule that ARC well in advance of the 3rd birthday. Again, we know that this doesn't always happen, but it's really important to get all of this process moving, because these are families that are new to the process. They are new to ARC. They don't know what these words mean. They don't know that it's admissions and release committee meeting. They don't know how long it's going to take. So we want to make sure that we give them enough time to really fully digest what this means. Next slide, please. So the transition conference, things that you really need to make sure that you're doing in that conference. Now, KEYS will have all of their KEIS KEYS. They'll have all of their things that they have to go over for transition. They're for Part C. For Part B, you want to make sure the family understands the referral process. Because a child is eligible for Part C programming does not automatically mean they will be eligible for Part B programming. There are different eligibility requirements. That's something that a lot of our parents don't fully understand when they come to us. They think, well, they got these services, so they should get these services, right? Not necessarily. Making sure they understand what the steps are. This is not an automatic thing, right? You have your first referral meeting, you have to talk about the referral process, then you have a possible evaluation if you don't have any information from First Steps, and then eligibility meetings. There's different steps. It's important to really provide that full scope to parents so they know what they're looking at. The timeline for determining eligibility is the child's 3rd birthday. Now, 60 school days is our typical eligibility requirement, but the child's 3rd birthday is the hard deadline for this transition. If you're 1 day over, you're non-compliant. It is the child's 3rd birthday is the transition. Now, that could be 60 school days. It may be 20 school days, depending on when you get that referral. But those are things that we can work with you on. So one thing that you do want to ask the parent is have them give you permission for someone from KEYS to attend that referral ARC. That's a really important piece that sometimes gets lost in the shuffle. Parents can invite, of course, anyone they want to those ARCs. It's really important for someone from KEYS to be there, the provider, the service coordinator, the evaluator, someone to provide information on that child. And this child's coming to you with a known disability, having had provided services. They may have up-to-date evaluations that you can use. So making sure that you have that information from KEYS is really important, as well as getting any releases to have transfers of evals or medical information, all of that stuff. And then the most important part, verifying that parent. That probably should come very first. Verifying the parent for Part B. That is something with First Steps is not as Part C. Sorry, keep saying First Steps. It's gonna take a long time for me to get used to saying KEYS or Part C. That's not something that is as strict in the Part C program is the parent. They have some different rules than we have. So you want to make sure that you have the official parent, if it's a guardian or you have to get some type of court-ordered situation happening, making sure you have that. Next slide, please. So these are your IDA requirements. You have to have a process for a referral. You all should have that down pat. And this is a non-district source, is that KEYS parent or doctor. Next slide. So this is the important piece is about response to intervention, RTI, our favorite 3 letters, right? And making sure that we are not over-identifying children just because they have a Part C IFSP, Individualized Family Service Plan. They've had an evaluation. It tells them that they have a delay or disability. That does not mean they qualify for Part B. Making sure we're not just saying, oh, yep, they're in. To circumvent time or some processes, we want to make sure that each kiddo that comes through our doors in early childhood and preschool and Part B truly needs that IEP that they have, or that they need to have those services to get to be successful in the classroom. Next slide, please. We talk a lot about response to intervention, RTI, having that referral process, having those relevant research-based instruction services. That's important. One of the most important things to remember is if you have a kiddo who's been receiving key services since they were 6 months old, you have a ton of documented research-based instruction and intervention services that have already happened. You can use that information as part of your RTI. You can use that information as part of your data to say, yeah, this kiddo, we're concerned still. We have, things that they may struggle in the classroom because of X, Y, and Z. You have that there. So it's really important to use what you have. Now, if you have a situation where a kid has only been receiving, key services for 6 months, 8 months, 9 months, you may not have a whole lot of data. You can do things like bring them in to your program for a little bit, have some play group kind of time, have some observation times. You have to do those observations anyway for your assessments, right? Having those kind of times where you bring them in, or providing information to the parents and saying, hey, parent, especially for things like articulation or speech language, parents can really go through some of those different interventions at home. They're very easy and quick to see how they're doing. And then you can bring them back in and do a little bit of data collection there. Next slide, please. All right. They've not made adequate progress. Again, you have all of this information. You have this information that this kid's been receiving services for a really long time. You can see that they've not made adequate progress. They are not at the same level as their peers. They are not, they're going to be impacted by this disability in the classroom. You're going to have that educational impact, that adverse effect. That's going to happen. Then you would consider that referral for special education. Again, the purpose of this is to use what you have. You don't have to recreate the wheel for a lot of these kids. I mean, you have a lot of information. Now, again, we'll get to some barriers here in a minute. You may not get access to all that information, but use what you have. Next slide, please. All right, big bold at the bottom is what we really need to know. RTI, you may not delay an evaluation of a child with a suspected or known disability based on RTI. You can complete it concurrently. You can do it the same time as you're doing that evaluation, but you may not delay an evaluation based on just RTI. Typically, with our KEYS kiddos that come in, doing it at the same time as you're going through the referral process and through the evaluation process is the best bet, because your timeline is usually short. It's usually not 60 days. So you usually have to use that information that you have from the parents and the providers, have those kiddos come in and do some different things in your building and see how they're doing, but making sure that we're not delaying evaluation of children based on RTI. Next slide, please. Okay. So my clock says I've got 5 minutes-ish. I can make it. So after you get the referral, everything has to be tidied up by the 3rd birthday. Results have to be provided. IEP has to be in place. 3rd birthday. If the child is qualified for those Part B services, you offer them programming in your state-funded program or other options like Head Start. We do have some parents who are very loyal to Head Start. Perhaps they were a Head Start child themselves, and they really want their student to go there. Head Start is a placement for students with disability or students without disability. As the LEA, you are responsible for providing those IDEA services in the Head Start program. However that looks through your full utilization and MOA agreements that we have with Head Start, but you are required to provide those services. But Head Start is a valid and acceptable placement for students with disability. If the child does not qualify, have other options. Head Start is an option. If the child does not qualify for Part B services, they will not qualify for state-funded preschool. 3-year-olds in Kentucky may only qualify for state-funded preschool based on disability. They may not qualify based on income. Those are our 4-year-olds. So as a 3-year-old, they would not qualify for state-funded preschool, but they may qualify for Head Start. There may be childcare or private preschools that you can provide information on, other community groups that you have in your area. It's important to have those kind of in the back of your head so you can provide those parents with information if the child ends up not qualifying. Next slide. All right. This timeline is really important. Third birthday. It's really important that you have that communication between Keys and your school district. We do send out the list of transitioning children quarterly that we receive from Keys. However, that is just a heads up. That is nothing official. That's just a, hey, we've got this information here. It's for you. You really have to have a good system in place of communication with your Keys providers. Again, that can be tough, and we know that. But that's something that you really have to work on. Some programs do monthly meetings or quarterly meetings with their providers in their area just to kind of gather information and get things done. Those are our barriers. Our transition's not smooth. It's rocky road, right? Provider issues with Keys. We know that's a big issue right now. We have a teacher shortage. We have an early intervention provider shortage. We've got folks out there that are seeing way too many kids, and sometimes kids get lost that way. We have areas where there's a provider desert. There isn't anyone there to service these children for Part C. That's an important thing to remember, that again, we feel the pressure of having teacher and assistant shortages. They're feeling it as well. District confusion. Sometimes our districts aren't sure who's where, what, and when, especially our districts that have an independent district and then a county district. We send that list out. It has every kid in that zip code. So that zip code may have both school districts and they don't know where that child's going to go to school. That can be an issue. Parent input. Parent input can be a little tricky. We know this. Sometimes our parents don't understand the process fully because they're brand new. This is a 3-year-old we're talking about. These are babies, right? These are itty bitties. This is the first time they've had these conversations, like special education. The word special education is very heavy, right? So they're having these conversations and they don't want you to think that their child, needs extra help because this is their bright point in their life and they want that child to be perfect, right? And we know that nothing makes these kids, imperfect. They're all perfect in our eyes. But we need to make sure that they're giving us honest input and not telling us what they think we want to hear. And then being ineligible. That's a hard conversation when you have a parent, especially those kiddos who have been in Keys since they were 6 months old. And it's a good thing. They've made enough progress, to age out, to transition out of getting services. But that's hard for parents to understand. That's hard for providers to understand. That's hard for district folks to understand. That can be a tough conversation to have. So making sure you're prepared for that if it ever was to come up. Next slide, please. These are just some questions. You can think about them. I don't know that we would have time here to talk about it, but think about them in your massive amounts of free time that you have as directors of special education. You can have some of these thoughts rolling around your head, or maybe have a buddy that you can talk with, wanting to make plans and processes that are really good to support the transition of students from Part C to Part B. And I have like 1 second left, and woo! All right. There's my alarm. Alicia, I think it's Carol Ann's turn.
Yes, Carol Ann is next. Thank you, Andrea. And I just wanted to say, for those of you, just going back to Andrea's question, for those of you who serve in the role as director of special education, but not also preschool program coordinator or you're the preschool program coordinator and not also the director of special education. This is a big collaboration point where you collaborate with the other person in your district who fills that other role. Because together you are responsible for these smooth transitions. And when we say 100% compliance of transition by their 3rd birthday, that means 100% compliance. And so the way to do that is to effectively collaborate within your community and within your district. And so, Carol-Ann, with that, I will turn it on over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Andrea. That was great information about indicator 12. I was going to emphasize as well what Alicia was just saying, how important that collaboration is around early childhood transition. In the work that we do in the Division of IDEA Monitoring and Results, we actually do the monitoring piece of ensuring that we're meeting those compliance requirements under this indicator. And where we've seen the most success is with those districts where there is a strong collaborative relationship. And that relationship is between the director of special education, the early childhood coordinator, if those are 2 different people, as well as those Part C partners. And so that's where we really have seen some success. So I would encourage you to try to build those relationships and those collaborative opportunities to help support your work with this indicator. All right, so I want to share a little bit with you about how we collect the data for indicator 12. We started last year, we started using a self-assessment survey. Prior to that, it was a spreadsheet, but now we have like a form that's a survey that we send out from the office to all directors of special education to enter the indicator 12 data. And so this survey asks you for information regarding each student that has been a part of the transition from Part C to Part B during that school year. If you'll remember back to Steve's slide where he showed you all those different requirements, the A, B, C, D, E, we include each of those on the survey, and we ask you to enter the number of students that each of those are applicable to. That survey is going to be sent out to you by May 1st, and that comes from OSEEL's Part B data manager. It's Amy Patterson. Some of you may have met her. She's been traveling around to the different CERTACs providing an end-of-year training. I think she has a couple more of those left, but you may have seen her at those. Or if you missed that training, I think she's going to do a recording of it as well and share with everyone. And she does go over this also in her training about the data collection and how important this is. I will share with you that we are here to help you as you are collecting your data. When you're working on that self-assessment survey, we would be happy to walk through it with you. And so we will be providing information about some opportunities to do that. But if you're ahead of the game and you want help before you receive any info, just feel free to reach out to me or to Andrea or Amy, and we will help you with walking through that data entry so that you can get that correct as you are entering it into your survey. Those surveys are due by June 30th. So that is the deadline to have that data reported to us. Once we receive that data from you, we do a couple of different things to validate the self-reported data. And so OSEP tells us that anytime we receive self-reported data, we have to validate it. And so if you report to us areas of non-compliance under this indicator, we're going to review that data. And if anything in the data looks like it might be off, it might not be accurate, if we have questions about it, we'll reach out to you. And we want to make sure before we issue a citation of noncompliance, we want to make sure it's accurate. And so we may follow up with you and ask you some questions, make sure it's not just an error in filling out the survey, that there actually was a missed timeline of having that IEP in place by the child's 3rd birthday. So we do verify that and follow up on that when we receive it. But for those districts that provide us self-reported data that said, hey, we're non-compliant, we missed the timeline for some students, then we do issue a report to that district The report goes to the superintendent and the dose is copied on that. And it basically just outlines what you told us. We'll have an introduction about indicator 12, what it is, why we look at that, how it fits into the SPP APR. And then we'll share information with you about this is what you self-reported to us. These are the areas of noncompliance, and here's what you need to do to correct that. And then we will work alongside you to help support you as you're going through that corrective action plan and as you're implementing things in your district to ensure that you are in compliance for the next year. So we'll work with you on that. We will, if you end up with a corrective action plan, we will assign a lead for that corrective action plan to you, someone out of our division, and that staff member will communicate with you. They will help you. If you have questions, they will be available to support you as you go through that process. The other thing that we do is when we receive self-reported data, that says we have 100% compliance for this indicator, we randomly identify 10% of those districts. And so we do that. We use an online randomizer where we just enter all the district names that reported 100% compliance, and we randomly pull 10% of those districts. And those are districts that we notify that we're going to do a desk review of their files. And so what we're going to do is we're going to review some of those student files to see if they are indeed compliant with the indicator. And then when we finish that review, we will send you a report, and it will outline if there is any non-compliance found. That will be addressed in the report and any of the required corrective action. So that's a little bit about the process for how that works. We'll kind of go on to the next slide. The way that we conduct those desk reviews is we utilize the compliance record review document, and Friendly is on top of it. She's already dropped it in the chat. I was getting ready to throw it in there. We utilize a compliance record review document. It's available online. It's available to you to use as a tool, but this is also the document that our team uses when we're reviewing files through desk reviews to determine if the student file is compliant or not. And so for indicator 12, we look at one item only, and you'll see that listed here, and we're looking at that Part C to Part B transition, and if the IEP is developed and implemented by the child's 3rd birthday. So that's what we look at when we do the record review for indicator 12. You can go on to the next slide. And I wanted to share with you some of the monitoring results that we had from this last year. So last June of 2023, districts reported to us their self-reported data for indicator 12. And then in the fall, in September and October, is when we conduct our desk reviews for indicator 12. And our results were that we found 6 student files were determined to be non-compliant, which meant that they missed the timeline to have the IEP in place by the child's 3rd birthday. And the target for indicator 12 is at 100%. OSEP sets that target for us. We don't get a choice in it. They set it and they say 100% compliance is the expectation. And we are very close. As a state, we do pretty well with this indicator, but we're just below that target. Our compliance rate that we just reported in our most recent SPP APR is 99.75%. So it's close, but it's not quite there, hitting the target. Anything less than 100% is non-compliance. And some of the reasons for the delays I wanted to share with you included some districts reported to us the use of contracted school psychologists that were from out of state, and that caused some delays in completing the evaluations timely. And then there were a few students that had some long-term hospitalizations that caused delays in their evaluation process. We can go to the next slide. That is all I had on indicator 12. I do have contact information for you though. I have my information there. And then Sheena Weddington is our exceptional children consultant that is leading this indicator and can provide support to you as well. But I just wanted to give you a brief little outline of what we do to monitor for this indicator and kind of what we're finding in our monitoring of indicator 12.
Thank you, Carol Ann, and that was great information. One thing this is one of those indicators that you need to think about ahead of time, right? You need to start every calendar year with a spreadsheet where you're documenting those transitions and keeping up with the dates that you receive, the first request for the transition meeting through the date of determining eligibility. And if you start that from the very beginning, you're not left in June trying to go back and make sure you're picking up all of the transitions that you had throughout the year. So that's just one little strategy that could help you be ready for that June report and make it a whole lot easier for you. Because remember, this is one of the ones due June 30th, and your staff, your school level staff, are very likely not working at that point. So you have to go with information that you have handy. So from that, we're going to take it all the way.
Hey, Alicia.
Yes.
It's Andrea. I don't know how to raise my hand on Zoom, so I was trying to do it like, in real life. I just wanted to add on to that really quickly that the information for this is collected July 1 to June 30th. It's based on the child's 3rd birthday. So if you have the transition meeting in June, but they don't turn 3 till August, that child won't count till next year's collection. So making sure that you have those dates on there. That's something that can get a little tricky. The date is the 3rd birthday.
Yes, that is a great clarification. Thank you, Andrea. And so today we're talking about kind of all things transition. So we're going to move now to transitioning in secondary education. And Steve, I will turn that back over to you.
All right, thank you. So you'll notice we're talking about secondary transition, and this slide says age 16 and above. So we've probably missed several transitions between when the little ones transition from Part C to B until they get to age 16 and high school. So you've missed transitions depending on how your grade spans are structured in your district. We might have missed a transition to kindergarten. You might have missed a transition from primary to upper elementary or elementary to middle. And not that those aren't important. They're very important transitions for children, for families, for IEP teams, but they are not something that OSEP is asking states to report on. So be thankful that all those transitions are not reported on. But OSEP is very concerned not only with that early transition to Part B, but also they're really interested in transitions towards the end of a student's time with you. And so indicator 13 is secondary transition. And there's a lot of words on this slide, but I want to bump to the next slide where I've kind of bulleted this out. So indicator 13 has several required elements, appropriate measurable post-secondary goals. So really the IEP goals that are about what the child wants to do when they're done with high school. They need to be updated annually, just like any other IEP goal. They need to be based on age-appropriate transition assessments. And then transition services need to be included. And with Kentucky, they need to be aligned with the student's individual learning plan, the ILP. And the slide before said age 16. But Kentucky goes above and beyond, which I think is a great thing, and starts earlier. So with regard to transition services, these are required in the student's 8th grade year or when the student has reached age 14, whichever comes first. So this is another one of those things, just like in the last one, we were talking about the child's birthday. This is also important. 8th grade, but if they turn 14 before 8th grade, it needs to be there at the 14th birthday. So transition services aligned with the student's ILP starts 8th grade, age 14, whichever's earlier. Also needs to include courses of study that are aligned with the student's ILP. The annual IEP goals need to be related to the student's transition services needs. The student should be invited at this point, and there are probably a lot of students that are being invited, at age 10, 9. But by the time that they're working on secondary transition, they need to be invited to the meeting and be a part of that. And then agency participation. So if there's any agencies that are going to be paying for services, providing services, they need to be invited with the parent or adult student's consent. So the way they calculate this is the percentage of youth with IEPs age 16 and above with an IEP that includes all those bullet points from the last slide. Like all of those things have to be present. If you have everything, but you forgot to invite the student, that's not going to be compliant with this indicator. If you invited the student, you had everything, but you didn't have you didn't base it on appropriate transition assessments, that's not going to be okay either. Non-compliance in both those cases. And then this bottom part here, if the state's policies provide a statement that public agencies must meet these requirements at an age younger than 16, they may, but are not required to choose to include youth beginning at the younger age. And that in Kentucky is 14 or 8th grade. Next slide. So it's a compliance target, must be 100%. Information must be provided about timely correction. So if you had an IEP secondary transition goal and it wasn't based on appropriate transition assessments, the correction would need to include showing that you redid that. And like I've said twice now already, in Kentucky, it includes students with disabilities age 14 or 8th grade. And I think now I'm throwing it back over to Carol Ann.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate that. So indicator 13, secondary transition, as Steve introduced, we do have a little bit of different requirements in Kentucky about those transition services required in 8th grade or when the student turns 14. But when we look at indicator 13, we're looking primarily at students age 16 and above. So that's where we, when we look at student records, we're looking for those 16 and above. Next slide, please. This information I won't read to you. Steve has already provided this to you. This is the information about what indicator 13 is measuring. But what I wanted to point out to you on this is that there are multiple components that are measured in this indicator, and each of those components have to be in compliance to be overall in compliance with the indicator. So there's lots of pieces, whereas with indicator 12, we're looking at one specific regulatory requirement. This, for indicator 13, we're looking at multiple different regulatory requirements. Next slide, please. All right, so the data collection for this indicator is very similar to the collection I described to you for indicator 12, but there are some differences. This data is collected through self-assessment, but instead of a survey, we utilize a spreadsheet. And that spreadsheet is sent to all of the directors of special education to enter the indicator 13 data into the spreadsheet. That is also sent by May 1st from our Part B data manager, Amy Patterson, and it is due by June 30th. So same due date for the data, it's just collected in a little bit different format. The way this data is collected, whereas indicator 12, you give us data on every single student, for indicator 13, you randomly select and review 10% of students who are age 16 and older. And we ask you to do at least 10. So if 10% is less than that, we ask that you review at least 10 student files and no more than 50. So if 10% is more than 50, you can stop at 50 as the maximum of files that you will review. And I'll talk about the review in just a few minutes, I think in the next slide. And so you'll review the student records, the file that you have for each of those students that you've randomly selected, and then you submit those results on the self-assessment report, that spreadsheet. You submit that to us by June 30th. And then we follow the same process with indicator 13 that we do with indicator 12 to review and validate that data. So if you report to us areas of non-compliance for indicator 13, we will check that data and we will verify that that data is accurate. If there's something that looks to us that might be off, you might have a question about, we will call you and follow up on that before we issue a report of non-compliance. But if you tell us you have non-compliance and we verify that to be accurate, then we will send you a report. Same way, it goes to the superintendent and the dose is copied, and we will outline in that report information about indicator 13, and then we will outline the information that you reported to us. These are the areas that you said were non-compliant. We have verified that, and these are the specific corrective actions that you must take. For the same that I explained for indicator 12, for indicator 13, for all of the districts that report to us, they have 100% compliance with this indicator, then we will randomly identify 10% of those districts. We use that online randomizer to determine those 10% of districts. And those districts will receive a desk review from us, where we will actually review some of the files that you reported to us, and then we will review additional files as well, so that we can ensure that the district is systemically implementing the indicator correctly. If we identify non-compliance through that review, we will make sure to notify you of that in writing. We will send a report to you regardless of what we find. We send a report. If you're 100% compliant for the indicator, we will notify you of that through the report. If you have any non-compliance for the indicator, we will notify you of that with the report as well, and the required corrective action that you must complete. Just a little bit about the corrective action. I mentioned a little bit on the last indicator, but if you are issued a report that says you have non-compliance, you are required to develop a corrective action plan. And that plan must be completed within as soon as possible, but no longer than 1 year from the date that you were initially notified that you had non-compliance. The other piece I wanted to share with you, when we send these reports out, any of our monitoring reports that we send to you, we do allow a clarification period. So we allow you 10 business days to come back and say to us, wait a minute, I forgot to submit something to you initially. I need you to go back and take a look at this. I think we were compliant in this area. So you have an opportunity to do this. This is not an opportunity to submit new data to us, or, things that you've tried to correct quickly, but it's an opportunity to say, hey, wait a minute, I had that consent from an outside agency. We got it back in December. I just forgot to give you a copy of it when you were doing the desk review. Here it is. Can you take a look at this student's file again? I think we got this one right. And then if based on the information you submit to us, if we see something that, if that makes a change in the non-compliance, then we will update that and issue you an amended report based on that information that you submit to us during clarification. All right, let's go to the next slide. All right, again, we utilize the compliance record review document, and there's a link to that in the chat. This is the document that we ask you to utilize as well when you are reviewing your own student records to provide self-reported data to us. The spreadsheet that you receive will give you the exact record review item numbers that you'll need to review. So they'll all be on there for you, and there'll be a place for you to say for each regulatory requirement, are you compliant? Yes. Or are you non-compliant? No. And if you look in the record review document, there is an entire section on transition services. We utilize that section of the record review document for indicator 13. And we also use a couple of the items from the meeting notice and membership of ARC section. And those are the items that talk about inviting the student to the meeting at age 16, inviting outside agency with consent from the parent. So those types of things may be in a different section, but we review those items as well. And like I said, when we send you the spreadsheet and say this is the data we need to collect, we will give you each of those specific items. Just like I mentioned for indicator 12, if you start your reviews for indicator 13 and you need some assistance, we're happy to help you. So feel free to call me, or email me. I'll connect you with someone that can help you walk through that review if you want some assistance from us while you're doing that. So we'd be happy to help. Next slide, please. All right. I wanted to share monitoring results with you for indicator 13. As a state, we are not quite as strong in this indicator as we were for indicator 12, but I'll reiterate, there are a lot of regulatory requirements that have to be met here. Whereas with the other indicator, it's one item, this one has multiple items. And so if you get one of them wrong, one non-compliance, you're non-compliant with the indicator. So for our 2023 monitoring results, and we do complete these desk reviews from September through November. They last a little bit longer than indicator 12 because there are more items we're looking at. So it takes us a little bit longer to review those. So from this last September to November, we had 28 LEAs or school districts that represented 159 student files that were determined to be non-compliant. And I'm going to share with you in the next few slides some of the greatest areas of non-compliance to kind of give you a heads up to prepare for that. The target for this indicator is 100%. It is a compliance indicator, and so it's 100%. If it's anything less than that, it's not compliant. And as a state, our compliance rate for this indicator for the most recent APR was 93.11%. All right, next slide. All right. These are I'm going to share with you the specific items from the record review document that we found in non-compliance most frequently with our reviews. And one of the reasons to share this with you is to kind of give you a heads up to say, hey, these are areas that we're finding as issues across the state as we are monitoring for this indicator. You have an opportunity right now to go ahead and start checking your own files. You can do that throughout the school year. If you identify problems, you can always schedule ARC meetings, work with your team, and correct those things before you ever have to report data to us. That's an opportunity. Once you report it to us and we tell you you have non-compliance, then you've got to fix it through the corrective action plan, and we'll help you through that process, and that's okay. But you have an opportunity to correct it before it ever even gets to that point, if you want to take a look at your files now. So the first one is around transition services that are provided or paid for by another agency. The regulation requires that the other agency be invited to send a representative as long as you have prior written consent from the parent or the child, if the child's an emancipated adult. And if the representative of the other public agency does not attend, then the district has to take other steps to obtain the participation of that other agency in planning of any of the transition services. This was the item that we identified non-compliant the most in our most recent record reviews of indicator 13. Either because the outside agency wasn't invited when the agency needed to be, but mainly it was because the outside agency was invited, the representative didn't attend, and there was nothing to document any other steps that were taken to obtain the participation of that agency. So that was a big one as far as areas of non-compliance. Another one is related to children who are 16. You have to have all of the following. You'll see these 3 bullet points. The IEP was in effect when the child turned 16. The purpose of the meeting is the consideration of the post-secondary goals and needed transition services, and includes the identity of any other agency invited to send a representative. So that was another area that was a problem. Sometimes the child wasn't invited. Sometimes there was discussion of an outside agency being involved, but they weren't invited to the meeting. Those were some of the things that came up during record reviews. Let's go to the next slide. All right. This is another one where there's multiple components to one regulation. And so you got to get all the pieces to have that one regulation in compliance. And so by the 16th birthday, the IEP has to include all the following: appropriate measurable post-secondary goals based upon age-appropriate transition assessments related to training, education, employment, and where appropriate, independent living skills, and the transition services, including the course of study needed to assist the child in reaching these goals. For the most part, the appropriate measurable post-secondary goals were pretty good. We had several compliances in that area. That's an area where I think we have improved as a state over time from what I've seen in monitoring. There were still some issues with non-compliance for those goals, but overall, when we cited this regulation, the main issue was with the second bullet, and it was with the course of study. And often what we're seeing in the course of study is that either sometimes it's not there, or it's not completed, or that, it's missing pieces. But often what we see is that you'll have a course of study outlined from, 8th grade all the way through 12th grade, and you'll have the courses listed. But when it gets to electives, it just says elective. It's just listed as elective, and there's no actual class that the student is planning to take. And so we're looking in there in that course of study for what are those electives the student will take that will help them to reach their post-secondary goals. What's going to help support them? Now, that could change over time. Their goals may change, their desires may change. So those elective courses that they get to choose may not stay the same, and that's okay. But there needs to be a plan in there of what those courses might be rather than just left blank. So that's an area to try to focus on. Another one is that at least 1 year prior to the student reaching the age of majority, the IEP includes a statement that the child has been informed of their rights. This one, typically, when we have cited this one, typically they have informed them of their rights. It just happened after they turned 18. It happened late. They didn't get it in on time. And so that's something you want to be aware of, is when does this student reach the age of majority, which in Kentucky is age 18, and making sure that this happens prior to them turning 18. All right, this is contact information. Again, my information is on here. And then also Brandy Hackney, and she is our exceptional children consultant that leads the work for Indicator 13. And she would be happy to answer any questions that you might have about this indicator.
Thank you, Carol Ann. One of the things that I wanted to say about looking at Indicator 13, we've talked all about compliance and how to do the reporting today. But remember that when you're working on those compliance pieces, you're also talking about the future for that student. And so authentically diving into that and authentically going through that process with your students and with your families leads to successful post-school outcomes, which is where we're going to next. And Steve, I will turn that over to you.
Thank you, Alicia. Thank you, Carol Ann. Yeah, so we're going to talk now about the final transition that you all are involved with. And this is ultimately the outcomes we want to see for children with disabilities after you've had them for however many years you've been working with them, and all the time and the effort, services that you provided. This is really what are the results of all that work and effort and care. So this indicator looks at the percentage of youth who are no longer in secondary school, so they had to have left, and had IEPs in effect at the time they left and were either enrolled in higher ed within 1 year of leaving high school. So it's a fairly short-term measure. It's just 1 year after they leave. Enrolled in higher ed or competitively employed within 1 year of leaving high school, or enrolled in higher ed or in some post-secondary education or training program, or competitively employed or in some other employment within 1 year of leaving high school. So this really is looking at all the different ways that things can turn out for a student and what their status is 1 year out. So next slide. And this is really just a straightforward percentage calculation. The percent enrolled in higher ed is just those youth who are no longer in secondary school that had IEPs in effect and enrolled in higher ed within 1 year of leaving high school, divided by the number of children or students who left and had IEPs in effect. And so this is pretty straightforward. Were they in higher ed? And there's some nuances on what higher ed means and how many, what qualifies as higher ed versus some other post-secondary. B is the percentage enrolled in higher ed. So it's all those youth who left and are included in A. So all the ones that were in higher ed plus all the ones who were competitively employed. And competitively employed has several factors, including it's got to be at least minimum wage, it's got to be a certain number of hours a week. Divided by the number that left. And then C, the next slide, please. Yeah, so C is the percent enrolled in higher ed, so all the youth who left that are in A, or in some other post-secondary education or training program. So they did something academic or training, vocational training, but maybe it doesn't qualify as higher ed for this indicator. Or they were competitively employed, so those youth in B, or in some other employment. So maybe they're employed on the family farm and they don't make minimum wage and they don't have all the requirements for competitive employment, but they are doing something, they are making an income of some kind, divided by the whole group of youth who left in the prior year. So those are the indicators we're looking at. Next slide. This is something that can be done all districts. I think it's all in Kentucky. I want to say it's all the districts have to provide data for this every year. But the state still has to say how representative the data are of the children, of the youth who left. Because just because every district has to try to interview or contact every youth who left the year before, they're not always successful in getting 100% response rate. So the state has to report how representative the data are of the state and of each of the districts. It must include information about the extent to which the response data represents the demographics of youth who are no longer in secondary school, considering things like race and ethnicity, disability category, and geographic location. Might also look at how they left. So does the data look different for dropouts compared to high school graduates, compared to youth who reach the maximum age, those kind of things. So that's the indicator. Next slide. And I will now turn it over to Allison.
Indeed, thank you. So again, I'm Allison Johnson. I'm with the Transition Education Unit here at the OSEEL, and I'm going to talk about indicator 14 in our post-secondary outcomes. And I think an important piece to really keep in mind is that a lot of what we've talked about so far this afternoon is based in compliance. It's, are we doing the thing the way that we have to according to regulation? But indicator 14 is very much about results. So are we achieving what we want to achieve because we've been doing these things based on the way that regulation says that we have to do them? And so we're going to talk about this, but it's going to sound maybe a little bit different than some of our prior conversations because it is about that results piece. Next slide, please. So we wanted to open to have a brief discussion about the challenges and opportunities that we have here in our state. And we really, in our TE, Transition Education Unit, like to think about it as a challenge and an opportunity. So first, we know that national data and Kentucky data shows that there's some pretty wide discrepancies in what our students are achieving or even being engaged in after high school. So even as adults, even past that 1 year out, we know that if you have a disability, you are far less likely to engage in post-secondary education or in the workforce at all. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And so that second bullet point, we know that there are a lot of barriers, and it can be very complex for individuals with disabilities and their families to navigate the systems to get to that post-secondary education engagement or to get to that meaningful workforce participation. And so that is a challenge, but also an opportunity for us here in Kentucky that we'll talk about in a few slides. And we also just like to reiterate that, you know, it's not just that we feel this, but the Board of Education has actually stated that they want every single Kentucky high school graduate to exit our system a critical thinker, a communicator, an empowered learner, a collaborator, and an engaged citizen. So when we take all these pieces together, we see that we do have some challenges. We know that there are challenges for our youth with disabilities in achieving what we want for them to achieve, right? In getting to a happy adult life after high school. But we have some real opportunities to push on that and to really support our students in achieving that through our work with post-secondary transition and indicator 14. Next slide, please. So the first thing we're going to look at is a brief overview of some of our most recent post-secondary outcomes statewide Kentucky data, and also how we collect this data, and really a plea for you all to help us collect really good data, because that's what we use to inform how we're going to support you and your students. Next slide, please. This is a repeated slide intentionally. So what I'm going to talk about now is really highlighting that piece of that national data showing the wide discrepancies for engagement and workforce participation between individuals with disabilities and their peers. Next slide, please. So as Steve already reviewed, I'm not going to review all of it, but indicator 14 has 3 parts about higher education, and then including higher education and those who are competitively employed under the federal definition. And then C is higher education, other education, competitively employed, other employed, essentially anyone who is not colloquial sitting on the couch, right? They're doing something after high school. Next slide, please. So these are the data for our indicator 14 here in Kentucky from the federal fiscal year 2022. And so this is all collected through the Youth 1 Year Out survey, which I'm going to talk more about in a minute. And so we look at youth 1 year after they exit high school, whether they drop out, they graduate, they age out when they exit high school. And so all of indicator 14 data would be considered like lag data. It's a year behind because we have to wait a year after students exit high school in order to report it. So you can see that our targets, which were set through a pretty long stakeholder involvement process that is used for all of our results indicators. If you want more information on that, you can go to the KDE SBP APR web page to read all about how we got our targets. But these are our targets for indicator 14. And so you can see that in this year, in the federal fiscal year 2022, which is 2 years ago at this point, we had surpassed all of our targets, right? So we see an increase. Kentucky students with disabilities who exited high school 1 year after high school were enrolled in higher education 18%. Were enrolled in higher education or competitively employed, meaning that federal definition. So they're working for at least minimum wage that is commensurate with their peers. They have, working with other folks who don't have disabilities, all of these pieces of competitive employment for a certain number of hours, a certain number of weeks. And so we had 57% of our students 1 year after high school who were doing that, which is pretty good. And so then you look at part C, which is everyone in A and B plus any other education, like Steve said, other education or training. So that could be like a welding certificate program that's not a 2 or 4 year degree or something like that, or other employment, which, as Steve said, could be on the farm. We also have seen a really big increase in students being engaged in like gig work. So working like a DoorDash or an Uber, which doesn't count under the definition typically for competitively employed, but it is employed and they are getting a wage and bringing in money. So that leaves us at 72-ish% of all Kentucky students with disabilities 1 year after they exited high school were engaged in something, which is great. Like, that's a really good number, except it's lower than the general population. And that means that we still have about 30% of our youth with disabilities a year out of high school are not engaged in anything. They're not in any sort of education, post-secondary, higher education, employment. And so that's the piece that we are really looking to push on in our transition education unit with some upcoming work that we're going to be talking about here in a few minutes, is to help Kentucky students find ways to be engaged. We want them employed. We want them in education. Next slide, please. So I gave you a very brief overview of the data, and this is how we get that data. So unlike some of the compliance indicators where you all report your data directly to OSEEL, the OSEEL for indicator 14 works with the Kentucky Post-School Outcome Center, also known as KIPSO, to administer the YOYO, the Youth 1 Year Out Survey. That survey is administered via telephone, typically, interviews. The data that the YOYO collects, it includes all those outcomes for indicator 14, that A, B, and C that we just went over. But there's also a lot of really good qualitative data that we collect on students' transition experiences within high school. For example, that's how I was able to say we've seen in the last couple of years an increase in students reporting gig work, because that came out of that qualitative piece that we're collecting. So the OSEEL and the KIPSO, we really rely on you, districts, to support that high quality data collection. So Kentucky's response rate last year was 66%, which is fantastic. It's really great. It's actually the highest we've had in my memory. I won't say forever because there might have been higher a long time ago. But what I mean is, for indicator 14, states are allowed to do a sample, but in Kentucky, we ask that districts contact each and every student with an IEP who left school in the previous year. So we're doing a whole population survey. So that means that we reached 66% of students who left high school a year ago, which means we didn't reach 44% of those students. Now, when we do that representativeness analysis that Steve was talking about in Kentucky, our results are generally fairly representative. We tend to be underrepresented for youth who dropped out of school, and we look at it geographically by region, so that kind of varies a bit. We're generally representative across all of our regions. When I say regions, I mean our CERTAC regions. But some years we may not be exactly representative. But one piece that we do know is that when you try and look at your data district to district, especially if you're in a smaller district, your data may not be as representative of your population because it's such a small sample size, or it could be such a small sample size. And so the higher our response rate, the clearer, cleaner data we have, and the better data you have to inform how you are going to work with us and others to really increase and improve these post-school outcomes. So we really encourage folks. There are some districts out there who have some really interesting and innovative ways to really push on collecting this data and getting really high response rates. KIPSO, Dr. Tony Lobianco at KIPSO can absolutely give you more information about that. Every week during the open window for data collection for indicator 14, which is right now until the end of August, in the news you can use that OSEEL sends out, there is a blurb of information. And so we highly encourage you, if you have any questions about this piece, about the YOYO, how to get this information, reach out to Dr. Tony Lobianco or the KIPSO team or us at the Transition Education Unit. We'll have our contact information here at the end. We would love to help connect you so that we can get some really solid, high quality data to inform the programs that we're going to talk about in just a minute. Next slide, please. So a little bit more about the YOYO that is helpful for you as a dose. You have access to your data for your district via the KIPSO dashboard so you can see. So some districts, the DOS does the collecting of the data. In some districts, they have someone else, a transition specialist or the case managers who are trained to do the collecting. So it varies district to district, but whoever is your representative for the Yo-Yo with KIPSO has access to that dashboard. And if it's not you and you're not sure, again, reach out. We'll get that to you. So you can always see your district data, but statewide data is released every year annually when the SPP APR broad data is released. But that other piece, so all that qualitative data I spoke about, KIPSO provides an additional written report and an additional organized slightly differently than the SPP APR state data dashboard. It's on the KIPSO website. And again, we are in that data collection, so I'm going to hit it one more time. Please collect that data. We need it. If you need help, let us know. Next slide, please. All right. And so as promised, talked a little bit about the data, where we are as a state, and that we're doing pretty well. We've got pretty good response rate. We want it to be better. And we know that we still have 28% of our youth that 1 year out of high school are not engaged at all. And so we at the OSEEL are really looking for ways that we can help support districts in improving that, because we want every Kentucky youth to exit high school and be able to have a happy adult life. And generally, at least for me, I need money to make my life happy so I can feed myself, which means I need a job and I need income. So we want to really help you all push on that 28% of youth who are not engaged and find ways to do it. So next slide, please. First, let's talk about some of the complex and challenging pathways to education and workforce participation for students and families. So this first program I'm going to talk about is really focused on interacting with students and families. Next slide, please. KY Transition 360. So I know that we have had a lot of different announcements around for the last 6 or 8 months. This is one of, it's a program that is funded by a federal grant from the Rehabilitation Services Administration, RSA. And so we are running it at KDE, the OSEEL, KY Transition 360. Next slide, please. And so this program is really focused on building partnerships across systems and agencies that are already working with youth to assist them in achieving post-secondary success, which sounds like a lot of words, but what I mean is that we're taking our KDE OSEEL folks and we are working with the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation, and we are working with our state centers for independent living, and we're working with our Kentucky KY SPIN, right? Special Parent Involvement Network. We're working with districts. We're working with lots of different agencies that are already doing work with youth in order to identify how they are being successful, how they are helping their youth get to employment, get to post-secondary education, and where we might be able to, through this program, support that. So to do that, we are in the process of identifying, we're going to have community-based family mentors in communities across the state. These mentors are going to be providing individual and small group mentoring for parents, families, and students. The focus is all on really reducing the barrier of those challenges in that pathway to post-secondary education or meaningful workforce and placement. So we're going to identify and address those barriers and challenges, really looking at, well, what is it that a student needs in order to be successful to get to meaningful workforce engagement? Oh, you need to get into services with the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. Well, our mentors are going to be in place to help bridge that gap and to make that connection from the parents and families to the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. They're going to be in place to talk about things like, oh, well, how does my child working impact their Social Security benefits that they receive? Because that's always a big concern we hear. So these community-based family mentors are really going to serve as an additional support across the state. They're going to be trained and working with all of these different state agencies to have the resources of these state agencies available. They're also going to really be building, strengthening local partnerships in that community because it's really, we're looking for this to be kids stay in their communities, and we want them to stay in their communities, but we want them to be meaningful and have that happy adult life in their community. So we're going to build those partnerships in order to help youth and families engage in those resources that are already there. And then we have a second program that we're working on, which is a grant that was awarded from the Federal Office of Special Education Programs, OSEP. And this one is focused on educators. So again, we're looking at that. The Kentucky Board of Education thinks that our education system should be preparing every graduate to be a critical thinker, a communicator, an empowered learner, collaborator, engaged citizen. Next slide. So this program is KY Transition 360 for educators. So this idea of the 360 is that we're looking for the holistic view of transitioning to adulthood for youth. But for this For Educators program, we're specifically targeting those in education. Next slide, please. So this program will be professional development opportunities. They're going to be available for any Kentucky public school educator. To be clear, we mean any Kentucky public school educator, regular education teachers, special education teachers, career technical education teachers, administrators, paraprofessionals, job coaches who are employed by the district, any public school educator in Kentucky. The initial professional development is going to debut fall 2024. So you'll be hearing more about it pretty soon. It's going to be online asynchronous trainings that are going to cover transition, post-secondary outcomes to provide essentially a base of knowledge so that everyone's working from the same place and that we all have the same resources available. And then following that initial push, there'll be future opportunities that will have cohorts of educators engaging in targeted development opportunities, addressing identified areas of need related to transition and outcomes. Basically, what we're saying is that we know there are some research-based predictors of post-school success. The NTAC, the National Technical Assistance Center on Transition, the Collaborative, has compiled a lot of different research. So that there's 27 predictors, is what they call them, that are identified as associated with positive post-school outcomes. And so these future opportunities are going to include grouping cohorts of educators, just like it says, to really target professional development based around some of those predictors and identified areas of need for those educators in their communities. So again, we're really trying to target what is needed, both in terms of what educators need, what a community needs, but really focusing on how can we move those numbers so that we don't have 28% of youth not engaged 1 year after high school. We want to have no youth not engaged 1 year out of high school. And that's really where we're trying to go. All right, so as promised, we have contact information here. Again, I'm Allison Johnson, Jason Wheatley, who you can feel free, Jason, to chime in if I've missed anything. If you have questions about any of the predictors, about indicator 14 in KIPSO and how we collect the data for the yo-yo, about KY Transition 360 or KY Transition 360 for educators, please feel free to reach out. We'd love to speak with you and get you more information. Jason, I see that your hand is up, so I'll be quiet and let you talk.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Allison completely 100% stole all of the thunder that I was hoping to share today, but Dr. Johnson did a wonderful job. One of the things that I wanted to say, I was like, okay, somehow I need to express this is going to be huge. Dr. Johnson referenced, we are pushing, and I can promise you we are 100% committed to continue to push in a positive way for improving post-school outcomes across Kentucky, and knowing that partnership is really key to that. Frank mentioned when we first started how important collaboration and leadership. So we have centered ourselves around collaboration. Andrea mentioned family transition. As Allison shared some very important bullets earlier, we understand that this is complex. Post-secondary transition is very complex. but we've got some cool opportunities. So again, when I was thinking, I kind of got off, but when I was thinking about how big this is going to be, I Googled quickly Kentucky slogans. This is going to be bigger than KFC. And so as you start to think about KY Transition 360, that's going to become as familiar as KFC is to you, to your community, to your school district. Probably not to your doctor, but it is going to be very familiar to you. So as we think, just to recap, KY Transition 360, that is going to be a program, a project that is a community resource. We will have resources in communities throughout the state, helping support families and students be connected with additional resources, be connected with opportunities. We're still in the design stage. We're still working on that exact service plan, but just know that it's coming. Know when you see KY Transition 360, it's something you want to be excited about and you want to learn about. And then the second opportunity that Allison mentioned, KY Transition 360 for educators, because we're not creative enough to come up with a completely different name. We have KY Transition 360 and then for educators as the other initiative. We are going to offer such a robust professional development program with incentives for people, for professionals to participate. We are designing this curriculum to be engaging for administrators, district administrators, school administrators, CTE teachers are going to enroll and sign up and learn about how to support students with disabilities and how they can be more successful in CTE. Counselors, we are designing such a robust curriculum that will be available for everyone. And so we're really excited about that. Again, we're going to keep pushing and we appreciate you all engaging with us now and in the future. So all good, Dr. Johnson. Thank you. All right, Alicia.
All right, thank you, Jason and Allison. And thank you to everybody who shared today. So since January, you have been able to meet so many of our leaders in the Office of Special Education and Early Learning, and I hope you've heard the intention in they are here to support you. You have an incredible team at OSEEL working on your behalf and working for you and working to make sure that you are successful so that your students and families can be successful. And it's very important for us to realize that that begins when they're coming to you at 3 years old, and it goes with them. You are there. You as a dose may be the one constant through every transition that they have as they go through their career in your school system. So your relationships with those families and each person at each transition point will ultimately be very impactful for your students. Brinley, if I can get the next slide, please. One of the things that I want to make you all aware of as new administrators is the Council of Administrators of Special Education. Many of you may already be members of this. They have a summer institute that's there on the slide. It's July 18th through 19th. One of the things that they do is if you are a first or second year director, they do have a new director's day, and that is the Sunday before all of that starts, or the day before. And so they would have more information. We wanted to make sure you were aware of that opportunity to participate in Kentucky Case. And it's a great place to collaborate with other directors across the state. As I said when we started, this is our last meeting of the 24-25 school year. OSEEL will be at the Kentucky Case meeting, but it is more to just kind of give you a general overview of office, things that are happening, that kind of thing. And then we will be looking at continuing these in the fall. but we will have more information coming on what that looks like for the fall. The way it's planned right now, you all started in January, so we would like to take you through a complete cycle of our training events ending in December. And then new directors who start in July, they're going to pick up in July and be able to carry forward. And so I hope that you guys have learned a lot through these workshops. I continue to learn. I've been doing this a long time, and every time somebody talks, I'm like, oh, that's a new strategy, or oh, that's something I didn't think about before when I was in the district. And so just thank you for your participation, for being here every month. And we hope you finish strong in the school year. And here is our survey for the day. If you could please scan that QR code and give us feedback on that survey, that's very helpful to us and looking at how we want to continue and move forward beyond today. And to our presenters today, thank you for your time and preparation and providing us with such great information. And if anybody has any questions, we are actually ahead of schedule. Write that down, might be the first time. So we can stay on and address any questions if you have those. I do see do we have access to the recordings? Yes, the recordings are located on the DOSE one-stop site or the preschool program coordinator one-stop site. And so as a DOSE or a preschool program coordinator, you have access to those, and all of the recordings are posted there. And the new ones, like this one, will get on the site within about a week. Okay. Well, if we don't have any other questions, feel free to log out and enjoy the rest of your day. I hope it's as beautiful in your part of the state as it is in mine right now.